The dressing room smelled faintly of old wood, face powder, and faded dreams. Isla Redgrave stood in front of the cracked mirror, her fingers trembling slightly as she removed the stage makeup from her face. The school's end-of-year play had just finished, the final applause still echoing faintly in her ears. Her students had performed brilliantly, but Isla's thoughts were far from celebratory. It had been 5 years since she last spoke to her father. 5 years since Douglas Redgrave had crossed his arms at her graduation from the Manchester Academy of Dramatic Arts and said, without a flicker of hesitation, "You'll regret this. One day you'll come crawling back." She never did. Instead, Isla threw herself into teaching drama at a local comprehensive school. It wasn't the stage she dreamt of, but it was real. Honest. She had built a little world of passion and discipline, where students who had never known the magic of performance learned to speak with confidence and feel seen for the first time. It wasn't glamorous, but it mattered. That night, after the applause faded and the hall emptied, a student named Tasha tugged at Isla's sleeve. "Miss Redgrave, someone filmed our play and posted it online. It's got loads of views already." Isla raised a brow, bemused. "How many is loads?" 50,000 in 2 hours. Isla blinked. "What?" Tasha held up her phone, her eyes wide. "And this guy messaged our page. He's from the West End." Isla stared at the screen. The message was short, formal, and surreal. "We've seen your recent production. Are you available for a creative direction meeting next week? There may be an opportunity with the Garrick Theatre." Isla felt her pulse quicken. The Garrick? That wasn't just a theatre. That was a world she'd shut the door on. A door that now, somehow, was opening again. She didn't sleep that night. The message looped in her head like an unfinished script. The next morning, she responded, heart pounding. She expected silence. Instead, within an hour, she had a date, a time, and a location. And one more detail. The lead investor of the Garrick's next production would be Douglas Redgrave. Her father. The name made her stomach knot. She hadn't said it aloud in years. She had imagined 1,000 ways to prove him wrong, but none of them involved seeing him again. As she walked to the meeting that day, dressed in a navy coat and boots that had seen better days, London felt different. Not warmer. Just louder. Like the city itself was watching. The Garrick's private meeting room was understated and grand. Black and white photos of legends hung on the walls. Isla stood by the window, nerves jangling. The door opened, and a tall man in a grey suit entered. He extended a hand. "Matthew Coates, Artistic Director. You must be Isla." She nodded, her throat dry. "I am. You've caused quite a stir." "I didn't mean to." "Oh, but that's how the best stories begin." He smiled and motioned for her to sit. The meeting was unlike anything she expected. No harsh judgments. No condescension. Just interest. He spoke of a new play, raw, intimate, about estranged families. They wanted her voice. Her direction. Then the final blow. The investor backing this project wants a creative mind that understands both distance and reconciliation. Your work shows that. But I feel I should tell you. It's Douglas Redgrave. He said the name gently, as though testing its weight. Isla didn't flinch. "I know," she said quietly. "He's my father." Matthew sat back, visibly surprised. "Well, that explains a few things." She stood up slowly. Her heart was thudding in her ears. "I'll direct the play," she said. "But he doesn't get to rewrite mine." Matthew gave her a long look, then nodded once. As she stepped out of the theater, the winter wind bit at her cheeks. She had no idea what waited ahead. But something deep inside her stirred. Not fear. Not anger. Something older. Something ready. The rehearsal studio was nothing like Isla remembered from her academy days. No scuffed floors, no leaking radiators. Just polished wood, high ceilings, and the faint scent of citrus cleaner. The Garrick Theatre didn't do scrappy. Everything here was deliberate. Controlled. Perfect. Isla walked in with her notebook held tightly to her chest. She was scheduled to meet the production team today. Not the actors, not yet. A soft murmur of voices came from the far end of the studio, where a long table stood surrounded by half a dozen people. Stage managers, a lighting director, costume supervisor, and one person she instantly recognized despite not having seen him in years. Charles Redgrave. Her older brother. His hair was slicked back, his suit impeccable, his posture exuding the same arrogance he had worn since they were teenagers. Charles was the pride of the family, the successor to their father's law firm and, apparently, now a consultant investor for the theater production. He looked up and locked eyes with Isla. Well, look who's traded her school plays for the big leagues. She didn't flinch. You still wear that same smug expression, I see. Family trait, I'm told, he replied, his smile thin. Their exchange was brief, clipped, the way strangers speak when they know too much history. Isla moved to the opposite side of the room, taking her place beside Matthew, who offered her a quiet nod of encouragement. The meeting began, and Isla stayed focused. She listened, asked the right questions, made quiet notes. But the tension in the room was undeniable. Charles kept interjecting with remarks about streamlining the narrative and making it more commercially accessible. It was clear he wanted to control the creative vision, just as their father had once tried to control her life. When the meeting ended, the others filtered out. Only Isla, Matthew, and Charles remained. Charles stood, casually slipping his hands into his pockets. Tell me, Isla, do you really think you can handle this? The pressure? The scrutiny? West End isn't a school assembly. Matthew began to step in, but Isla raised a hand gently. She looked her brother dead in the eyes. You know what I remember about school assemblies, Charles? They're where kids learn to speak up, even when they're scared. Charles's smile faltered. I'm not scared, she said. Not of you. And not of Dad. For a moment, something shifted behind his eyes. A flicker of discomfort. Then, as quickly as it came, it was gone. I suppose we'll see, he said coolly before walking out. Matthew exhaled. I didn't know your brother would be this involved. Had I known, it wouldn't have changed anything, Isla replied. Let him hover. Let him report back to our father. I've worked too hard to be shaken by old ghosts. She turned back toward the rehearsal space, but her hand lingered on the doorframe. She knew this production was no longer just about art. It was about reclaiming something long buried. Later that evening, Isla sat alone at her tiny flat in Islington, staring at the script draft. The play, titled Stillness Between Storms, centered around a daughter confronting the legacy of a parent who always demanded too much but gave too little. Every line she wrote now bled with personal resonance. Her phone buzzed. Unknown number. She hesitated, then answered. A familiar voice crackled through the line. You're really doing this, then? Her father. His voice was colder than she remembered. You always were dramatic, he continued. Let's see how long the spotlight lasts. Then the line went dead. Isla sat frozen for a long moment. Not with fear. With clarity. This wasn't just a role. It was her reckoning. The following morning, Isla arrived at the Garrick Theatre earlier than usual. The corridors were quiet. The only sounds were her heels echoing against the marble floor and the soft hum of the building waking up. Rehearsals wouldn't start for another hour. But she needed time. Time to think. To prepare. Her encounter with her father had unsettled something deep within her. Not fear. Not anymore. But a feeling she couldn't quite name. Like standing at the edge of something vast, both exhilarating and dangerous. She stepped into the main rehearsal hall, where stage markings stretched across the floor like battle plans. At the far end, near the piano, a young woman with dark curls tied up in a loose knot was humming softly. Lena, Isla called. The woman turned and beamed. Morning, Isla. Thought I'd warm up early. My nerves are dancing today. Isla smiled. Mine too. Lena Bailey was one of the lead actresses in Stillness Between Storms, young, electric on stage, with a raw kind of presence that made you forget she was acting. Isla had cast her instinctively, knowing the role needed someone who could walk that tightrope between strength and vulnerability. As more of the cast began to trickle in, the energy in the room shifted. Scripts were opened, laughter echoed. Someone tuned the piano. Yet even amid the warmth and collaboration, Isla noticed Charles again, standing in the corner, arms folded, eyes scanning every movement like a hawk watching prey. He wasn't just observing. He was waiting for something to go wrong. And sure enough, just before the rehearsal began, He approached her. "I've been reviewing the financials," he said, holding out a slim folder. "I think you're overspending on set construction." Isla raised an eyebrow. "You're not the artistic director, Charles." "No, but I am protecting the investment. If the numbers don't hold, the board might reconsider your contract. You know how quickly theaters lose faith when money vanishes." She didn't flinch. "The money isn't vanishing. It's building a story. Something people will remember. That's sentimental. Not sustainable." Before Isla could respond, Matthew arrived, sensing the tension. "We're ready to begin," he said, gently steering Charles away with a diplomatic nod. Rehearsals kicked off with a run-through of the pivotal confrontation scene, a moment where the daughter character faces down her estranged father on stage. The dialogue, loaded with years of repressed emotion, felt almost too real. Lena stood center stage, trembling but powerful, delivering her lines as though they were torn straight from Isla's diary. "You taught me to be silent, father. And now you fear the sound of my voice." The room was silent. Everyone felt it. Even Charles. When the scene ended, the cast broke into quiet applause, but Isla remained frozen. Her heart pounded. Her hands were shaking. Lena walked over, placing a hand on her arm. "You all right?" Isla nodded, eyes glossy. "You were right," Lena whispered. "This script. It's a truth many of us live with." Later that evening, as Isla packed her notes, she found a sealed envelope tucked beneath her satchel. No name. No signature. Just a theater seat number written on the front. Box D4. She opened it. Inside was a single sentence typed neatly on a small piece of card. "We all have secrets to protect. Don't let yours be your downfall." There was no mistaking the tone. Someone was watching her. The next morning brought a chill not from the wind, but from Isla's own unease. She barely slept, the anonymous note etched in her mind. The seat number, the warning, it wasn't just a threat. It was knowledge. Someone knew her. Someone had been watching closely enough to strike where it hurt. At the Garrick Theatre, Isla kept her composure. Rehearsals resumed with tight focus, the team pressing toward opening night. Yet Isla's attention was fractured. Her eyes darted to shadows backstage, to the dress circle seats during lighting checks. Always searching for the face behind the note. During a short break, Matthew approached her with a quiet urgency. "There's something I think you should see," he said, handing her a brown envelope. Inside were scanned documents, emails, booking records, and a faded stage program from over a decade ago. At the top, The Winter Wake, 2011. And right beneath it, Assistant Director, Isla Wren. She frowned. "I haven't seen this in years." "Why now?" Matthew pointed to a name listed as a production consultant, Ronan Hale. Isla's breath caught. "He's the one who vanished during the funding scandal," Matthew said softly. "Disappeared overnight. Took the blame. But look at the signatures on the financial records." He flipped to the final page. A different name. Charles Wren. "You're not the only one they're watching," Matthew added. "And maybe Ronan Hale isn't so gone after all." The puzzle began to shift. What if the note wasn't a warning, but a plea? A reminder of a past she'd tried to bury? That night, Isla returned to her small flat in Chelsea and rummaged through an old trunk at the back of her wardrobe. She hadn't opened it in years. Inside lay photos from her early theater days, notebooks filled with scribbled stage directions, and a worn red folder labeled Ronan, Private. Her fingers hesitated before she opened it. Inside were old letters, unpaid invoices, and one torn photo. Ronan and her, mid-laugh, backstage during the Winter Wake. He had believed in her more than anyone else back then, until it all fell apart. A sticky note was taped to the back of the photo. "Truth always survives the final curtain." It was Ronan's handwriting. The room spun slightly. She knew what she had to do. The next morning, Isla took a cab to the British Theatre Archive, a discreet building tucked away near Farringdon. She hadn't been here in years, but she knew exactly what she was looking for. The production files from 2011, filed under disputed accounts. The clerk hesitated. "That box has a restricted notice on it. Archive code 11-04B. Isla leaned in. "My name is in that file. And I need to see it." The clerk paused, then handed her a clipboard. 5 minutes. No copies. She was led to a small reading room where the battered file box waited. Isla opened it with trembling hands. Inside were reports she'd never seen before. Memos between the production house and private donors, notes from auditors, even fragments of handwritten letters. But one stood out. A short, typed letter dated March 7, 2011. To whom it may concern. The discrepancies in the accounts were never mine. I was told to take the fall. I have evidence if needed. When the time is right, someone will know where to find me. R.H. On the back, scribbled hastily in pencil. Ask Isla. She saw it too. She stared at the words, her hands cold. The shadows weren't just watching. They were waiting. And the curtain on the past was lifting once again. The next rehearsal felt different. The cast's energy was strained, like they too sensed a shift in the air. Isla walked into the theater with the file from the archives still fresh in her mind, her steps measured, eyes scanning every corner. She was no longer just the director. She was a target, or perhaps a pawn in someone else's unfinished play. Backstage, she found a bouquet of deep red roses on her dressing table. There was no note. No sender. Her breath caught in her throat. No one knew she used that space, except her and Matthew. She showed him the flowers. He stared at them for a long moment. Isla. This is escalating. That night, Isla and Matthew combed through old contact lists. Ronan Hale had left no digital footprint for over a decade. No social media. No tax records. Nothing. It was as if he had truly vanished. But then, a message came through. An anonymous email. Subject. Dress rehearsal. Isla. You never stopped searching. I didn't stop watching. It's time. Meet me at the lyric stage. Midnight. Come alone. Matthew paced the room. It's a trap. Maybe, Isla replied, staring at the screen. But if it's not, it's the only lead we've got. The lyric stage was an abandoned part of the old theater district, long since condemned. Dust choked the aisles and cracked chandeliers hung from rotting beams. Isla stepped carefully across warped floorboards, her torchlight sweeping over faded posters and forgotten props. At the center of the stage stood a single chair. She approached slowly. Ronan. She called, voice echoing. From the wings, a figure stepped into the light. He looked older, gaunter, but his eyes were unmistakable. Isla. Her chest tightened. It really is you. I had to disappear. They gave me a choice. Take the fall or they'd ruin you too. She blinked, stunned. Who's they? He handed her a folder, his fingers trembling. The same board members who back your father's charity now. Charles was never the mastermind. He was the puppet. Isla opened the folder and scanned the documents. Letters, payoffs, signed agreements. It was deeper than she imagined. A theater-wide corruption ring, hidden behind scholarships, false productions, and falsified invoices, stretching across a decade. But why now? She asked. Because you've stepped back into the light, Ronan said, voice brittle. And someone wants to ensure you don't stay there. A loud crash echoed from above, the catwalks. Ronan shoved the folder into Isla's hands. Go. Now. Lights shattered. Dust rained down. Isla sprinted through the wings, heart pounding, as heavy footsteps followed behind her. She didn't look back. She burst onto the street, gasping for air, clutching the folder like a lifeline. Someone didn't want the past uncovered. And now, they knew she had the truth in her hands. The following morning, Isla barely slept. She sat in her flat, blinds drawn, the folder from Ronan splayed across her kitchen table. Her mind kept replaying the encounter, the crash overhead, the weight of secret she'd been forced to carry. The names in the documents were powerful. Board members, patrons, even politicians. All linked through shell grants and fictitious productions designed to siphon funding. Matthew arrived, pale and grim. I spoke to a friend in audit. These accounts check out. They've been embezzling under the guise of arts funding for years. And my father? Isla asked, though she already knew the answer. His name's all over it. Isla closed her eyes. Her father had been her anchor, the respected face of Westwood's culture revival. But the truth was undeniable. He had protected a network of fraud for his own gain. Still, she couldn't go public yet. The theater's final show was only 3 days away, and if she triggered a scandal now, the production, the actors, the staff, would all suffer. She needed a plan that struck at the heart of the deception, without destroying everything around it. At rehearsal, Isla took a gamble. She handed each lead actor a reworked script, lines from their plays subtly changed to mirror the real-life events from the folder. Not direct enough to be obvious, but clear enough for those watching carefully. "This isn't just a show anymore," she told them. "It's a message." Some were confused. Others, especially those who'd been at Westwood for years, nodded slowly in understanding. They had suspicions of their own. Isla wasn't alone. On the night of the final performance, the theater was packed. The air buzzed with excitement and tension. Isla stood backstage in the shadows, scanning the crowd. Several familiar faces sat in the front row. Her father. 3 board members named in the documents. 1 politician with a too bright smile. The curtain rose. The story played out. An ambitious young director, a corrupt board, a disappeared mentor. Every scene built the tension higher, until gasps started to ripple through the audience. They were recognizing themselves. Then came the monologue. Delivered by the lead actress, center stage, spotlight stark. "I asked him what legacy meant," she said, voice sharp, deliberate. "He said it was the echo of applause long after you've left. But I've learned something else. Legacy is what people find when they sweep the dust from what you've buried." The theater went silent. From the wings, Isla watched her father shift in his seat. She stepped out. Not onto the stage, but into the aisles, flanked by 2 officers from the Financial Crimes Unit. She'd sent them the evidence that morning. Her voice rang through the hushed theater. "For those who think the arts are a playground for power, this is your final curtain." Gasps. Movement. Her father stood, but the officers were faster. They escorted him out as flashes from journalists' cameras lit the auditorium. The play continued, the actors unfazed, professional. But the atmosphere had transformed. It was no longer fiction. The following day, Westwood Theater was everywhere. In the headlines, the news bulletins, and across every feed on social media. Corruption exposed in cultural landmark. Directors' daring betrayal of the betrayers. Isla's name was linked with both scandal and bravery. She walked into the now silent theater. The seats were empty. The lights dimmed. But the echoes of last night remained. Matthew met her in the lobby, holding his phone. "They've frozen all assets connected to your father. Investigations are expanding. That board's finished." She nodded. "And Westwood?" He hesitated. "Donations have halted. Several sponsors pulled out. Some media outlets are already calling for the theater's closure." Isla looked around. "This building, this stage was my life. I was willing to destroy it if it meant the truth came out. But it deserves to live. Without the lies." There was silence between them, until Ronan entered, unannounced as always. "You've got 30 hours," he said, "before the city sends officials to begin decommissioning. If you want to prove Westwood's worth, this is your last shot." 30 hours. Isla didn't waste a second. She rallied the cast, the crew, even the front-of-house volunteers. Word spread fast. One final performance. A raw, unscripted, improvised act. A tribute to the theater. A confession. A reckoning. By midnight, lights were being rigged. Costumes unearthed. Musicians tuning old instruments. Isla worked non-stop, scribbling monologues, cutting together audio clips from rehearsals, editing footage of their journey. The next day, queues began to form outside the theater long before sunset. People came not for spectacle, but for truth. Artists, students, critics, locals, they all sensed this night meant something. As the final show began, Isla stepped onto the stage. No curtain. No script. Just her voice. "My name is Isla Moorcroft. I was raised in these seats, in these wings, under these lights. Last night, I burned bridges many of you thought sacred. But I did it because art deserves better than corruption. It deserves honesty. This theater, flawed as it was, held dreams. And those dreams belong to us all, not to those who exploit them." One by one, performers took to the stage, weaving stories that blurred the line between memory and fiction. They cried. They laughed. They shouted. They sang. It wasn't polished. It wasn't perfect. But it was alive. Somewhere near the end, Ronan appeared on stage unplanned. He held up a photograph. It was of Isla, just a child, sitting on the stage floor, bathed in gold light. We let that little girl down. But tonight, we make it right. Thunderous applause. Tears flowed. Even Matthew, stoic until now, wiped his eyes. After the final bow, the crowd stood. Silent, moved. Then a single clap. Then another. Until the entire theater roared in ovation. The next morning, Isla returned to Westwood Theater alone. The stage still smelled of old wood and dust, and the silence was no longer heavy. It was peaceful. Sunlight streamed through the tall windows, dancing across the velvet seats like a spotlight searching for one final act. A knock echoed through the front doors. She opened them to find two city officials waiting, holding clipboards. They looked at her, then at the building behind her. "We saw the performance last night," one of them said. "We weren't supposed to attend. But we did." The other stepped forward. "We're recommending a pause on the closure. A full cultural review." "You made quite the impression." Isla's eyes widened. "You mean Westwood stays? For now. Let's see what more it can be under honest hands." They left, and she stood at the doorway, blinking back tears. She wasn't sure what Westwood would become, whether it would rise or crumble slowly under the weight of past damage, but for the first time, it had a fighting chance. As she walked backstage, she found Matthew sitting in the wings, already writing notes. He glanced up. "We've got a message from the National Arts Trust. They want to meet. Might be open to funding a full revival project." Isla smiled. "Let's give them something they can't ignore." Over the next weeks, the theater transformed. Volunteers returned to repaint walls. Actors who once left in silence now came to help mend props, repair costumes, rehang curtains. The place buzzed again. Not with greed, not with control, but with something real. Something raw. Isla reclaimed her title not as executive artistic director, but as simply artistic steward. No hierarchy. No ivory tower. Just someone who held the light so others could shine. Her father never tried to contact her again. His name vanished from industry whispers. Her mother sent a letter and signed with one sentence, "You did what none of us could." She pinned it backstage. And so, on the anniversary of her first failed production, Isla stepped once more onto the Westwood stage. The audience packed the house. Students, veterans, first-time theatergoers, critics who once dismissed her. The lights dimmed. The hush fell. And with a slow, steady breath, Isla began. No apologies. No regrets. Just a story. A stage. And a woman who never crumbled.